right. Good evening and welcome, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We have been around since 1974 and here on the campus of Agnes Scott College since 2019. We're very excited to be here tonight to discuss the Seven Mountains Mandate, exposing the dangerous plan to Christianize America and destroy democracy. We are here with the author, Matthew Boedy, in conversation with Tina Pippin, who is one of our very favorite people. And so we're so delighted that she is here to help facilitate this conversation. We were already very excited about this book. We were already getting pre-orders for this book. And in fact, we had already reached out to Matthew about this book because we knew that it was going to be of interest to our communities no matter what. And then, of course, the unexpected happened, and Charlie Kirk, who figures quite large in this book, was murdered. And so the book is even more timely than it already was. And so we're very lucky to have him with us. He has been navigating an immense amount of press and pressure. And so I'm very grateful to you, Matthew, for still coming to be here with us to launch your book. And to everybody who is physically here with us tonight, and also the very large crowd who is online with us tonight, watching from around the country and around the world. So I'll introduce Tina more formally. Tina is the Wallace M. Alston Professor of Bible and Religion at Agnes Scott College here in Decatur. She was a member of the Bible and Culture Collective, the author of Death and Desire, The Rhetoric of Gender and the Apocalypse of John, Apocalyptic Bodies, The Biblical End of the World in Text and Image, Mother Goose, Mother Jones, Mommy Dearest, Biblical Mothers and Their Children, along with other publications on apocalyptic and the Bible and film studies. Her most recent book is The Actual Jesus, which is available here to purchase tonight. It just came out less than a month ago. And Tina is the first recipient of the American Academy of Religion's Excellence in Teaching Award. She is currently president-elect of the Society of Biblical Literature. She's an activist, educator, and also co-hosts a radical pedagogy podcast with Lucia Herthsether, which is called Nothing Never Happens. And you can follow that at nothingneverhappens.org. And the man of the hour is Matthew Boedy. He was targeted by Turning Point USA in 2016 and listed on its professor watch list after speaking up against allowing concealed guns on college campuses. As one of the foremost experts on Turning Point USA and its founder and CEO, Charlie Kirk, Boedy exposes their role in perpetuating Christian nationalism in the United States and the threat to democracy they pose. With a background in journalism, an MFA in creative writing, and a PhD in rhetoric, he is a dynamic and experienced scholar whose first book, Speaking of Evil, explored the evolving rhetoric surrounding evil. Boedy currently teaches rhetoric and composition courses at the University of North Georgia and lives in Gainesville, Georgia, with his wife and 2 daughters. So welcome to both of you. Welcome to everyone who's here with us tonight. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, both for our folks online and in the room. If you are here in person, I ask that you just raise your hand and wait for me to get to you with the microphone so that our folks who are watching online can actually hear your voice. But let's go ahead and put our hands together for Matthew Boedy.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction and inviting me here. I was certainly aware of this place before, never actually been here, but I'm certainly aware of its historic importance. But I did want to say again, the assassination of Charlie Kirk 3 weeks ago has changed not only my book, but our nation. So if you want to donate to any anti-gun violence organization, I recommend any of them.
Okay, thank you, ER, and thank you, Charis Books, for doing yet another fabulous book discussion. And Matthew, I want to thank you for this book because it is a very clear summary of the Christian nationalism and the Seven Mountains movement. And so, first question is, How did you, as a professor of English and rhetoric and journalism, come to this topic at this time?
I'd been writing about Turning Point for a while, since I was targeted by them in 2016, and they were in their start a pro-capitalism, free market, anti-higher ed group. Their big first viral moment was a social media tagline: "Big government sucks." And they were that for quite a few years. They started in 2012, and then the Professor Watch This came out in 2016. So I started paying attention to them. And to be honest with you, what I wrote about them was a blog. It was a hobby for a while, but then when they switched to Christian nationalism around 2019, 2020, that fell directly into my day job, into my lap, and I recognized right away what they were doing and what they were saying and how they were saying it. And still combined with the personal and the professional, made it very interesting to me. And then I started, really was one of the few people to write about them early on. Charlie Kirk became popular, during the Biden administration for several reasons, but they did not really understand what Turning Point was doing with Christian nationalism. So I wrote about that, and that led to different offers and finally to this book. So I do tell my students that I am Charlie Kirk's chief critic, but I don't know if he knows that or he knew that.
Yeah. Well, could you take us through a quick summary of the Seven Mountains?
Yeah.
And the theology behind it and why it is dangerous to democracy.
So the Seven Mountains are the seven areas of our culture that Christian nationalism or Christian nationalists want to take back for Jesus, because they believe these seven areas are run by anti-Christian forces or Christian persecution advocates, that our government is one of them. And so these areas of culture, or they want to win the culture war by taking back these areas. And there are two really distinct theological elements to that. One is an end times theology, that is what happens at the end of the world. Their idea is they want to take back the culture and create a nation, a Christian nation, ready for Jesus's return, and to give him that Christian nation, and where he would rule for so many years. The other theological element is that this idea that Christianity is not a religion of suffering or religion of failure or religion of losing, or death. It is a religion of victory, a religion of defeating your enemy. And Jesus is not a suffering servant on the cross. He is a king ready to return. He's a hyper-masculine, victorious person who uses different means to defeat their enemies. So there are two pictures of how you become a Christian nationalist. You have to have an idea of what you want in victory, but also how you would remake Jesus to get there.
Mm. Yeah. So the dispensationalist and premillennial view of the end times is driving this.
I think that there are several people in the Seven Mountains Mandate that there once were that. And if you're not familiar with that, if you've seen the Left Behind movies or any type of end times, it's always this end of the world battle between good and evil, and perhaps Christians are going to be persecuted and perhaps they're going to be taken to heaven before it happens. That's usually when we hear about Christian end times thing, that they want to bring on the end times because the end times are going to be better than anything that's happening now, that the persecution will get worse and worse. I think that Charlie is a particular good example of that because he's aware of that theology. He's aware of his audience thinking that. And so he wants them to not debate the end times, but also act in ways that would not be, oh, we're just going to get persecuted in the end. We're not going to do anything. So the dispensationalist, the premillennial, is the idea that there's going to be an end times where Christians are going to be persecuted and we're going to lose and Jesus is going to come back. The Christian nationalists are like, no, we're going to produce a nation that is not going to be Christian persecuted, that Christians are going to rule, and then Jesus will come back. So it is really two distinct differences, two distinct ideas of the end times, and yet they're both in the same camp here because they have the same political goals.
Mm-hmm. So the rhetoric is very violent, and if you watch any of the Charlie Kirk videos, where he barrages people with so-called facts and scripture passages, about the hot button issues of the day, abortion and immigration and the rest of it. What do you see happening with that rhetoric when you see these not debates but
encounters
arguments?
on campus? Yes.
Encounters, yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why Charlie was a originator of these debate me bros on campus or prove me wrong events, because he never loses a debate. He's never proven wrong. And that's on purpose. He prepares way ahead for the people who get questions. But also his version of debate is about not just winning or getting the audience to applaud and suggest that you're right. It is about shaming or making the other side feel like a loser. So you think about formal debate, and we've talked about the Liberty University debate team, right? There's sides, and you have to argue points, and then sometimes you have to switch sides and argue that point, and then the judges decide if you win. That is not what happens at a Charlie Kirk campus event. It is Charlie really interrupting people and reframing questions and getting people trapped in their own unprepared, logic, so that he can then say, well, you forgot about this. And then they make a video of it. And so if you think about, after his death, after his assassination, he was, for some days, labeled an advocate for free speech, a martyr for free speech. He used free speech. He used the advantages of a college campus to do his agenda. And I think that certainly advocated for his own speech, but I would not say that his rhetorical style was about allowing all voices to happen. There was a great article in the New York Times this weekend because they watched a bunch of his campus events videos and talked about the rhetorical style in which he operates. And that's, again, as I kind of described, is making interruptions, making people do binary decisions or yes or no, and then trapping in their answer and really getting them to a point where they kind of give up, and he eventually declares himself the winner.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Turning Point and other Christian nationalists preach about is the American way of life, and how that's disintegrated over the decades, and we need to reclaim it by becoming a Christian theocracy. And that, and you argue in your book, dismantles democracy. Right. So in terms of the moral values, and this will lead into things like family, gender, sexuality, hypermasculinity, transphobia, and the rest of their ideology. How would you define their moral system?
I mean, certainly it is their version of the Bible. It is their version of certain verses that they take about the role of the church, for example, and they should be the moral arbiter of not just the church, but everyone else. There is an idea that the pictures of Israel in the Christian Old Testament is what they want America to be. So that set of laws, and there are massive numbers of them, to apply to our 7 areas of culture. And that's really one idea of what a theocracy is. Their better word for that is theonomy, which is the rule by Christian law. So their goal to win the culture war is to make a Christian consensus culture. So there certainly would be Christian laws or principles and Christian policies, and then also powerful Christians that would run the cultural institutions, not just the government. So they've come up with this word theonomy, I think, because they know the baggage that comes with theocracy, and we've seen movies that portray that. So it's the idea that, we should be a rule of law. Well, here's this great 10 commandments we should have in our schools and such like that. So there is many ways in which they go about doing that. Obviously, electing people is the mountain of government. The mountain of family is about silencing and erasing and not allowing things that don't match their definitions.
Yeah. So you've mentioned education and 10 commandments in the schools. Also, you mentioned voucher programs, charter schools, the inclusion of the Bible and creationism. There's a whole list of things.
Yeah, creation science has fallen away, but it is teaching God through chemistry and biology. Yeah.
And there's a homeschool movement that's also with Christian nationalism.
Homeschool is sort of the secret weapon of that, because you have your own curriculum and do your own thing. And of course, you're also often connected to a church to allow that. The voucher movement has expanded in recent years. Obviously, in Georgia, we have a pretty expansive voucher law now, and what that allows is obviously a defunding of public schools, but it allows people who've never attended a public school to get money to pay for their private school. So you didn't have to go to a failing school or a school you didn't like to get the money. You could just apply for it anyway. But what Turning Point has done in recent years is go back into the public schools and try then to remake them after they lost all this money. So the best example of that is the 1776 commission from Donald Trump's first term. Charlie Kirk was on that commission. It was about presenting this American history that was very patriotic, and it was about then creating a curriculum that you could send into the public schools. So don't think that just because it's public, it's free from religious interference. They're trying to make the cultural institutions Christian, and obviously education is one of them through this patriotic education that they're continuing now in the second administration.
How are they defining patriotism?
Charlie does talk about saving Western civilization, and that does mean America. It means liberty and freedom. It certainly means, I think the best example is the speech we heard today from the Secretary of Defense about this warrior ethos, that patriots are usually male who are defending your nation. Patriots are people who, of course, would follow a patriotic leader in certain ways. But patriots also have Charlie has said that America cannot last unless, he's quoting some founding father, I forget who it is, but America can't last without a religious core. So patriots are obviously only Christian then. You certainly cannot have other religions be part of the military. They're afraid of that, of Islam taking over for that reason.
Yeah. Well, in terms of leadership, we're talking about a very patriarchal system here.
Yeah.
Very two genders, very biblical womanhood, biblical manhood.
Yeah, we saw that in the Secretary of Defense's speech today as well. This warrior ethos is obviously male, and the mountain of family is about saying that men are the protectors of the nation, and women are the protectors or providers at home. And one of the ways in which the Secretary of Defense is trying to do that is to, as he said today, raise the physical standard so that both genders have to meet the highest male standard. And everyone's saying that would both be unfair to every different ages, but also genders, and therefore would eliminate many of the female combat troops that we have. And that is on purpose, is to have this warrior ethos in the Defense Department that I think is replicated in these cultural movements like Turning Point. They have two events for their genders. One is a Young Women's Leadership Summit where they talk about women getting their MRS degree at college and getting married. And then they have these men's summits, which they've only had one, but is basically described as a weekend in the mountains where they do teamwork exercises, but also have a military ethos, training and walking long and breaking yourself down. It is very military centered. It's in fact run by a former Marine to create this defender of the nation, even though you weren't in the military ethos.
Yeah, so they're very ableist too, right?
Well, yes, I couldn't do it either, even though I'm perfectly healthy.
Yeah. So in terms of the gender ideology, it's also intersected with things like Christian influencers, which
the trad wives, I think, is what you're implying.
Yeah, and having a lot of kids. How does this also intersect with race?
I mean, I've not seen a non-white trad wife in my short time.
Exactly.
Looking at them. We see this on TV there's a reality show by the Magnolia Network having these families out in the prairie and doing prairie life. And that's the idea, that the man would go out and hunt and the women would come home and kill or fix whatever they hunted. Trad wife is not just a social media phenomenon, though. You have pictures of people being in the kitchen and doing families, but it is also very much, I mean, Erica Kirk is a good example of that. She certainly has lots of money in a mansion, so she didn't live in the prairie, but the trad wife is someone who, is traditionally following the gender roles that we saw in the 50s. And, if the Seven Mountains Mandate started in 1975, they were responding to things that happened in the 60s, and they want to go back before that. So you can see where that goes.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of money to be able to do that.
Or be not very happy at it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, and then Jen Hatmaker just published the book Awake, about her experience.
Yeah.
And how that fell apart with her husband's affair.
Yeah.
So you wonder, in these sort of communities that are being formed by these groups, sort of a Real Housewives of Christian Nationalism or something. I mean, is that gonna be part
I don't know if Magnolia Network wants that show, but I've heard stories of networks wanting to do that type of show. And we've kind of seen that in a joking way. I think several years ago we saw, I think it's called a Wife Swap or something, but they would choose these traditional fundamental families and then switch it with this person who'd had no rules or whatever. And, it's great TV, but that was sort of jokingly, but now it's an actual real, way in which to conquer the culture. So the question is, if you don't believe that, or you don't want that for your family, and the majority of the people don't seem to do that, how would they win the culture by doing it? What they're basically suggesting is that they're a minority movement. And so they use democratic ideas to win power, and then use anti-democratic means to enforce this cultural tradition. So it is not about convincing the rest of us to go along with it.
Yeah, I think you had some pages to read from the family chapter that would be relevant here.
This is the opening pages to chapter 4, The Mountain of Family. The date was July 23rd, 2023. The Walmart in Hastings, Nebraska was the trap. 2 Turning Point staffers working with its exposing evil media unit called Frontline's Child Safety Unit had set up a meeting with a 23-year-old Nebraska man named Chris they'd been communicating with under the guise of being a 12-year-old girl. Their goal? To catch a predator. But Turning Point had no idea what it was doing, and the scheme blew up in their face. The Turning Point staffer leading the effort, his name is Callan Diamedia, would go on to be arrested and enter a pre-trial diversion program later that year for assaulting another of his targets, an Arizona State University professor. I talk about it in another chapter. Diamedia and Turning Point told Hastings, Nebraska police they had started communicating with Chris in February of that year, and they had recordings and chat logs of what they said were sexually explicit conversations between their decoy and Chris. A nearly 8-minute video by Frontline style with red lights in a dark studio with Diamedia anchoring the expose said Chris had been recently identifying as a transgender female, and Chris told the Frontline's team the surgery was scheduled for the coming fall. Now, Chris was wearing blue pants and a tight-fitting T-shirt that spelled love across several lines in it, and the Pride rainbow color scheme, as Frontline called it, also on the shirt, was standing in the girls' clothing section ready to meet in person. Instead, Diamedia confronted Chris ambush-style with a Turning Point staffer recording the encounter, like Chris Hansen on the NBC show To Catch a Predator that ran from 2004 to 2008. Diamedia tried to entice Chris to chat, but very quickly Chris became visibly angry and walked away. Diamedia and his camera operator followed. Chris moved quickly through the store and then through the sliding doors of the main entrance and into a tan sedan, all the while trying to get Turning Point to stop following him. Their crew followed anyway, yelling, "That's what you did," after recounting several of the things they had from the conversations. Eventually, Chris got into a car. Diamedia banged on the driver's window with his knuckles as the car backed up. In a rush to get away, Chris backed into a blue truck, and he took off anyway, but eventually was tracked down by police at a gas station a few miles away. Police interviewed Chris and the Turning Point staff and taught Diamedia a quick lesson in Nebraska law. While Chris was cited for the hit and run, there was no sex crime charges because in Nebraska, only law enforcement is allowed to be a decoy. In addition, rather than skillfully waiting for their target to initiate predatory contact, the Turning Point decoy began communication with Chris, restarted it after Chris cut it off, and even asked Chris to meet. Hastings police said in a statement posted to its Facebook page, after Turning Point went public with its ambush that, quote, it was disappointing, end quote, that Frontlines and Turning Point didn't inform police ahead of time. Quote, due to their lack of understanding Nebraska law, they have obtained information that cannot be legitimately used by law enforcement to further an investigation or criminal prosecution, end quote. Despite these errors, Turning Point flooded social media with its ambush video, which went viral with many millions of views. Charlie Kirk hosted the Frontlines teams on his national radio show. Despite numerous and ongoing headlines of police using decoys in chat rooms to arrest unsuspecting people, Charlie Kirk questioned police behavior in this case because of the transgender element. Police had explained why it could not use any of the Frontline recordings, but Kirk asked his friend Delamita on that September radio show, do you think the local law enforcement in Hastings is afraid to proceed because this person is trans? Delamita acknowledged, quote, it was a possibility because people are afraid to act against any class of protected people. That is the beginning of chapter 4. I did want to add, I did not use Chris's full name because he was not charged with any crime there, but I went looking for an update on him. And a couple months later, he was arrested for credit card fraud. And I don't know the outcome of that, but I would think that after this incident, his life changed dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the danger is targeted to individuals, like the professor watch list, and trans folk and anyone who disagrees with
or doesn't meet their meet their standards. So you can see it's not just a rhetorical war. It's not just if you think about culture war as a distraction from other things, they're real people following real people in a Walmart and then ambushing them on video. I will say that, with the two incidents described in this chapter, the ambushing of the professor and then the ambushing of the person at Walmart, they've gone on to do similar things. They didn't learn from this failure, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah, so they were trying to mimic the NBC show. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did not go well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some current tactics that they're using that maybe since you've written the book that you're looking at?
Well, I mean, now that the President Trump is in office, they feel emboldened to do quite more. So they've spent a lot of time on immigration and this Frontlines media example. And really, I think what they've been doing is they've been doing ride-alongs with Border Patrol and things like that, and filming people getting arrested at the border. And then, they did a lot on alligator Alcatraz and things like that. And really not so much showing the terrible conditions or showing the issues with it, but showing how full it is or how quickly it was built or something along those lines. So if you listen to the Turning Point White House correspondent, for example, they do weekly, what happened at the White House this week. It's very praiseworthy of the president and all the things. So there's the media examples. There have been other ways in which they have targeted different isms and ideology, and that includes people. I really think that in terms of higher education, one of the things they've been doing is trying, obviously since Charlie's death, is get people fired for comments that they've made online. They have a list, a database, a new list that they've made. The other thing is they have a school board watch list, a directory of school board members they don't like in school districts they don't like. And I think a lot of them are in Arizona. So making lists, making ready-made targets, doing these individual targets, and really then making content for their website. Yeah.
So they're making a lot of money.
Oh, there is quite a lot of money. Yes.
So this leads into a question about wealth and power and the prosperity gospel that's behind this. Where's the line between this is an action of real belief and grifting?
So my definition of grifting is, it is a con artist, a con man who doesn't believe in the thing that they're doing. But also, grifting is making a lot of money from unreputable actions. I do think, if you know anything about the history of conservative Christians involved in politics, Turning Point's repeating a lot of the things we've heard before. Yeah. So if you want to say that that's just grifting because they're doing the same thing, I think that's okay. I do think that in terms of the amount of money this organization has, its budget is $100 million for just one arm, and they have a large merchandise area that you can buy, and they take lots of donations from grassroots and from big donors. That they use the money for certainly unreputable or nefarious ends, but they're also, I guess, making a lot of money. That is, they take donor money and then go build these media arm farms, and then they bring in money. So it really is a way in which to make a lot of money for Charlie and his allies. There's been several stories about how much money they've made off Turning Point Action, their political arm, for example. Or they're, especially after his death, he's been been told, oh, he never he donated his Turning Point salary to different organizations. Well, he made $300,000 from Turning Point, but he made like $5 million from Salem Radio. So that's not a great heroic act. At the same time, I think that the grifting part is, do you believe that they are Christian? Do you believe that their faith is real? I would have to say yes, that they are doing it in God's name because they believe this is what God wants. So the grifting part is the stakes of that raised even more, because they're not going to stop doing it if their grift doesn't go well.
Yeah, they have a certain way they're reading scripture to find a capitalistic God and a capitalistic Jesus that wants him to be wealthy.
Yeah, and there are other verses. I did a Sunday school lesson a couple of days ago about the ways in which they think about the church as this, help the widows, help the poor, community thing, or is it the command center for the nation? Is it the moral depositor of the nation? So they twist, if you want to say that, or reinterpret different verses to give them justification for what they're doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even stoning men who lay with men from Leviticus, right?
Yeah, that's been a quote that's been thrown out there in the last few weeks since Charlie's death. Mm-hmm. And Charlie is very good at what he does, so he's not going to say directly, that thing. What he did say was he quoted the verse and then said, well, I'm just saying, it just says this, and he just leaves it at that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that a lot with the biblical text, right? Yeah. So given wealth and power and our current administration, in what ways is Turning Point connected with Project 2025 and certain Supreme Court justices and I'm seeing a web, not to be a conspiracy theorist here, but there's a web of relations.
Well, I mean, they are conspiring together. Yeah. I think that, Project 2025 was this big collection of what they were going to do to the federal government. There's many organizations that helped build it, and Turning Point was one of them. And if you think about Project 2025 as one of the 7 mountains, one of the things they're doing is dismantling the government. As I said, Turning Point's original a bumper sticker was "Big Government Sucks," so they want to reduce the size of the federal government. I think also because Turning Point is so influential now, and Charlie was the center of it, they became, or still are now, a conversation mover, not just starter. Like the senators and the representatives and the GOP, not just retweet them, but push their ideas. And don't come up with their own. So Turning Point becomes not just a content creation machine, but a pusher of driver of policy. And they did that because they have all this money and now they have all this power. And Charlie obviously had very close relationships with the president and the president's son and Stephen Miller and all the other people you would think of in the administration. He was a political kingmaker because he was successful at all that he did. And I think that continues after his death. Turning Point is being introduced to the nation in a new way, especially when we saw the memorial service.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a new bumper sticker. Big religion sucks, right? We could carry it at Charis, maybe. Just kidding.
Well, I mean, if you want to write a book in your retirement, there you go. There's a title.
Yeah. So we could go into more of the connection with the current administration and where you see some real danger in terms of democracy being unraveled.
Right. So if we think about the Seven Mountains Mandate as an anti-democratic force, they're using democratic elements to get elected, and we saw that with the president. But they're also minority movements, so they want to disavow any power to the majority. So we can see that with people in power in the government who don't necessarily say they represent everyone; they represent a very small portion of people. And I think that the danger from the Seven Mountains Mandate is not just their idea, their expansive ideas for our culture. It is that they don't see a future of the democracy with religious pluralism. As I mentioned, Charlie Kirk is famous for saying that there's a founding father that said that America has to have a religious core to survive. They're afraid of other religions coming in. They're certainly have reinterpreted the First Amendment and the separation of church and state, in a way in which would only promote Protestant religions. Charlie has said at times that the founding fathers were that their idea of the First Amendment was that they would not choose between Protestant sects, but obviously that leaves out a bunch of other religions. So to create this cultural consensus means that we're not a majority rule country, but also that our democratic institutions, where we're supposed to debate and compromise and come to some agreement among all of us, would only be ruled by the people in the high places, which is a phrase from the Seven Mountains Mandate. That is, this consensus is made by a small group of people, and that is fundamentally anti-democratic.
This sounds to me very similar to some fascist ideology. What's the difference? One being, of course, grounded in Christianity, and the other.
I think before Donald Trump, the Seven Mountains Mandate was about influencing and using spiritual power to retake America. But now I think many people have pointed out they like him for several reasons, and that's one of them. He says, I alone can fix it. So he alone can offer them the power to win this cultural war. So he is as people in the Seven Mountains Mandate have said, he is a biblical king in a figure. He's King Cyrus, and there's other figures that he's been mentioned. And this is from a guy named Lance Wallnau, who was a founding father of the Seven Mountains movement. So it's not just a fringe idea. So he offers them not just power to implement policy, but he is a representative of their success, that God has put him in office to allow them to operate. So if you think of the anti-democratic ways of doing government, authoritarianism blends with the Seven Mountains, even though you think it is about persuasion and rhetoric, but it is not.
Yeah. Trump has called himself the chosen one, and then I heard recently, I don't know if it's in your book, but no, it wouldn't be because your book was done beforehand, that Charlie Kirk was Stephen, or
the martyrdom rhetoric obviously has come along in the last few weeks. He's been compared to Stephen the first martyr. He's been compared to a prophet. He's be compared to different Christian martyrs who've died for spreading the gospel. He is getting a statue at a college in Florida. It's got a road named after him in Arizona. And so the martyrdom rhetoric really is about obviously honoring him, but it is also about giving divine approval to anything you do in his name. So that is exactly what we heard from the president, both at the memorial service and other things he's done. We're going to do this in his name. And we're going to use then obviously the emotional attachment to the event of his death to propel that. That certainly has echoes of fascism that we've heard before, having this martyr person put up and say, this is who we have to honor by doing all these things.
Yeah. So how are we to respond to this? And I'm thinking, I've been reading Reverend Dr. William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, who says we need an interfaith together in coalition with secular humanists and others, persecuted minorities, to come together and create a coalition that deals with systemic racism and injustice and inequity.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it as the Seven Mountains Mandate as an anti-democratic force, as a minority movement, the only answer then is a majority movement. But the majority movement has to be united around a particular message. And this is why the Seven Mountains Mandate has been successful as it is. They've been united around a very specific strategy. So that's certainly one way. And to be honest with you, much of you sighed when we were talking about how negative it was. And so I was writing the book and I was like, yeah, this is pretty bad. How do I offer something else besides the exposing of the plan? So at the end of each chapter, I tried a couple of paragraphs on what it should look like if we were doing this well in each of the 7 areas. And I'm no political scientist, but I'm just like, we have to find some way in which to go back to or create anew the idea that we're all in this together, the us versus them and the good versus evil, which is obviously a divine approval for the good. That is really giving them the opening. So if they're an anti-democratic group, a minority group, the majority movement helps. But I also think that the question becomes, what do we do with those people in the movement once they decide to leave, or are they not going to do that? How do we invite them into a democratic community when they have spent some years not wanting to be in it? I don't certainly have any answers on that one, but I will think if we got anything from Charlie Kirk and his praise for being on college campuses, that's just one place where we could start is college campuses.
Yeah. Well, and Turning Point and other groups, conservative Christian groups like it, give easy answers, really compact, and you don't really have to do a whole lot of questioning and thinking.
They like certain questions, right?
Yeah.
Questions they can answer pretty easily, but yeah.
I
mean, bumper sticker theology is bad, certainly, and I think that they understood or understand that to organize and train young people into politics, you have to give them really simple ideas that they can repeat. You can call them talking points if you want, but they're really good at that. And the response to that has to be discussion and debate, but I don't know how many people are also interested in that, though.
Yeah, and I wonder what's going to happen when, the wealth is not going to trickle down to these college students who are going to graduate in a few years with this ideology, but low wage jobs and not able to buy a house and no health care and everything that's being put in place right now by the administration.
Well, you got to then do the prosperity gospel. You have to.
God is
entrepreneur your way into millions. Yeah. As a side note, one of the first things that Charlie Kirk wrote was a critique of a textbook that's being used in his high school, and it was he did not like that they were not mentioning trickle down enough, and so he wrote a critique of it for Breitbart News. That was his first publication.
Yeah. Okay, is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure you get said tonight?
Man, many people have asked me, what is the future for Turning Point itself? And Erica's been named the new CEO, and I don't know how long a widow with 2 children can sustain that type of action, but I do hope she continues on that. I do think they're built to last. I don't think they're going anywhere. Even with the death of their founder, they obviously have a lot more money and a lot more people interested in their group now, and I think that will sustain them. So I don't know if there'll be a second book, but they'll be around.
Yeah. Okay.
We're gonna do questions now.
So we have an online question to start us out, and then I'll come to you, sir, in just a sec. All right. So our online question is: how can we go about trying to engage with people who have been sort of slippery slope groomed into believing or supporting many of the goals of the 7 Mountains Mandate pillars? So maybe people who don't even necessarily identify as, fundamentalist in any kind of way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's been polling I mentioned in the book that roughly 30% of Americans would agree with the Seven Mountains Mandate, even though they might not name it that. I do think we have to convince them that it is not about winning a culture war. It's about working with everyone to create a better community. If I go back to my rhetorical training, it is about having a personal relationship with the person, which is ethos, and it's about having an emotional connection and trying to get them beyond emotional reactions to the daily news, which is pathos. And then I think it's about undoing the thought process they have. So we talk about misinformation too, but really just turning it a little bit different so they would see it this way, which is logos. I don't think that's we could do all three at the same time.
Were you ever able to figure out or research which, quote, founding father Charlie was supposedly quoting when he said that religion had to be the core? Because of all, I've read them extensively, and none of them ever went down that road.
John Adams. I mean, it sounds like John Adams, but I know it's not Thomas Jefferson. But he often quotes John Adams, especially with the Massachusetts militia story. I haven't yet. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. They have lots of quotes from founding fathers that sometimes don't exist. Question from Sir.
The Roman philosopher Seneca said that the common man finds religion to be true, the wise man finds it to be false, and the government leaders find it to be youthful.
Opiate of the people, I think, also has been said about that.
For both of you, what could possibly be unattractive about a society or government based on the Ten Commandments?
Oh, where to start?
Go ahead.
Well, the Ten Commandments were originally there is no originally, but there are two sets of Ten Commandments in the Hebrew Bible.
20 of them? Well, I didn't know that.
Well, they're different. They're in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, different time periods, and they were given only to the men of the group. And so, then thou shalt not cover thy neighbor's wife was for men. So there have been Jewish feminist movements that Judith Plasko and others who want to, stand again at Sinai and renew a covenant with God/goddess, not necessarily a patriarchal masculine God. The Ten Commandments are an ancient law code, like the ancient Babylonian law code, Hammurabi. It's of its time, and we can be in conversation with it, but it's not the Ten Commandments that's hanging in the schools. Those were kind of redone and revised by the conservative Christian group in the mid 20th century, I think.
And I'll answer your question by not answering it, and say that the people that want the Ten Commandments in schools, and Turning Point's one of those groups, they're not interested in the text of the Ten Commandments. They're interested in the ethos that comes along with it. They're interested in using it as a fill in the blank, because those are hard to enforce, and you could never. And we need more laws than those 10. But they're interested in suggesting that our laws could be based upon them, and they decide what those laws are. So the question is, what is unattractive about that? I think that it is about a small group of people deciding for the rest of us what those laws are, and saying that these are the 10 that we have to follow, but they are the basis for everything else. That's what makes it unattractive to me.
Yeah, and I've seen several places that our current president has broken all of them. Yeah. Sure. And I tend to go with Mel Brooks in The Greatest Story Ever Told, or whatever. that, you know, he comes out with the 15 commandments and he
Right.
drops
And he drops one of them.
one
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of the tablets.
Yeah.
So it's those other 5 commandments that say, thou shalt not abide by Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
Other
Right.
things.
So, I mean, they would, what's unattractive is they would be the one deciding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question.
I have another.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Look at other countries, Saudi Arabia, Muslim countries. Look at Dearborn, Michigan. All societies have a dominant religion that affects the way they're made, the way they behave, the way they treat women, the way they treat men. Why shouldn't we?
I think that if I go back to the Charlie Kirk quote about the founding fathers wanted a general Protestant consensus. One, there is no Protestant consensus among Protestants, and then two, I think that the level of vagueness that we go high up with, we should have a moral and religious people, as he quoted this founding father. It is always deciding what that is and who is in charge of defining that. I go back to Christopher Hitchens, the atheist philosopher, who said we need the word evil. We need that word to describe what he saw in Iraq and what he saw in other places, and he was not a religious person. So we need these words to describe our laws and our policies and our principles. We don't necessarily need a consensus about the religion around these words, but we need words to judge, and that's what usually laws are. So I don't necessarily think we need a small fringe of people deciding for the rest of us. We do need to do it together, but I don't think that small fringe is interested in that. Did you want to add to that, Tina?
Well, I mean, if you just say the word Baptist, which is a Protestant term, you've got, you know,
At least 3 that I can think of.
Yeah, and more. You know, no agreement on that. You know, from the most progressive to the least.
Yeah.
Right. So.
I think of Turning Point as part of the coctopus. That is, you know, the tentacles.
Yeah, the Koch brothers. Yeah,
the Koch brothers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation, all of those, and those are also part of this larger, you know, process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, program that goes back to the Powell memo, and you know, it's like they're all spreading the same kind of ideology, and it's all funded by dark money. And so, would you place Turning Point USA within the coctopus? And what about dark money? Who's funding it? How is it getting funded?
Yeah, I do think I've read in the last couple of years there have been comments by the Koch Foundation about Turning Point and the ways in which they operate in terms of being on college campuses and making these videos, and their audience interaction is bad. They're still funding them, but they wanted to put that statement out there when Turning Point was under attack by different organizations. We don't know where all of Turning Point gets its money from, but we some people who study tax records have been able to see which donates to which group. And yes, the Koch Foundation funds foundations and groups which fund Turning Point and on down the line. So yes, the dark money is a problem there. But I also want to point out that Turning Point itself, because it is so big now, it is making donations to groups that the Koch Foundation would have funded themselves. And it also then doesn't have to report where they put the money or where they get the money from. And the role of the dark money we've seen in several ways, the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas being one of them. And I think it doesn't help us when we have a large amount of money that we can't see, and also a large amount of money that seems to have an impact very directly on policy. But yes, they're certainly part of that network.
I'm not quite sure how to say this articulately, but I think early on in this conversation, you said that the difference between grifter and these people.
Yeah.
And I think I heard you say that you think they honestly believe in what they're saying. And I think that as soon as you say they honestly believe it, those people who want to be good Christians, or those people who want to believe, I think that gives them a lot of power. I mean, how do you undo?
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, as soon as, so I think it's a mistake to believe that they honestly believe it, or to say that to other people.
Right. I guess. So the question is, how did you convince their followers to not be in that movement? If you go into it trying to convince them that the higher ups don't believe it, they're not going to believe you. They're just going to turn you off there. I think that is true for many Turning Point staffers and advocates and allies, that they believe Charlie Kirk is a Christian and is a great Christian man. So I'm not going to get anywhere by saying he's not. I also think that the wrapping yourself up in this thing is how you undo it. So putting your identity in this group, even as powerful as it is, that's why I'm interested in finding these ex-Turning Point staffers. There's been a few that's been speaking up recently about that, and how not just much, again, it's a lot of money and a lot of power, but how the organization works behind the scenes. I think that could be helpful. I don't think we're going to argue out of them wanting a Christian culture. Maybe we might argue them out of not being part of Turning Point or not donating money and their time to that. But it would be very difficult to both take away the identity of Turning Point as great and also their identity as that. That's too many fences there.
We have a good conversation going on in the chat here online about people who, kind of continuing with that first question, like, are relating to and desiring the martyrdom and the victimhood of Charlie Kirk, right? Like, on my way to work today, I saw a giant digital billboard, like, you know, with his face, and like
Steak and Shake did one too.
Like believer, father, you know, all this stuff. But believer was number one, right? And so, you know, a couple of people were saying that their mothers in particular maybe didn't even really know who Charlie Kirk was before he died.
And now they do.
But now have a relationship to him as a martyr figure. And so I'm going back to this idea that you're talking about like, well, you know, like, is it so bad for people to, you know, have a relationship to faith, you know? But it's like, it's the victimhood and martyrdom piece, right? It's like, they don't just have a relationship to Christianity. There are many ways to be a Christian. Obviously, and there are many ways to be a person of faith beyond Christianity, but like the victimhood and persecution piece is, I think, the piece that's so pernicious. And I'm wondering, kind of, and it's white people, right? Like, it's white people for the most part who want to be victims. And so I'm wondering, kind of interrupting that, and how we kind of.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to provide them evidence of no persecution, because it does happen in other countries, and they just use that for themselves here in America. I think that undoing that emotional attachment to martyrs and to persecution is really difficult. You're not going to convince them there's no persecution. I think you have to turn it to, okay, if you feel that you're persecuted, you know, is your response to be politically active, or is it to be a suffering servant? They really have radically changed the turn your other cheek verse to not be as passive So it is about arguing scripture, I would think so, but also like, how do you convince someone who doesn't share the same facts with you? So I don't think I've really addressed that in the book. There are other people that's been trying to do that, but it's really difficult because you have to have that person right in front of you, and you have to have them for a long time right in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a growing number of certificate programs at theological seminaries now on religious trauma.
Okay. Yeah.
You know,
okay.
dealing with religious trauma syndrome of various kinds, people coming out of these kind of autocratic churches.
Yeah, we might have to get back into cult research. Yeah. Question over here.
I have a question about something that I heard Charlie Kirk say, and it may or may not relate to some of the discussions we've had so far related to empathy.
Yeah.
I know that I've heard several instances where he said, I don't believe in empathy.
Right.
Or the empathy. Yeah. And I don't know how that squares with the larger point that you're making, or is that just one of the many tools to use to divide?
He was, I don't know the exact quote, but he was repeating a fairly large segment of Christian nationalism that see empathy as toxic, because it creates a willingness not to tell the truth. It creates a set of feelings that don't go along with truth. You can walk down that road to social justice and DEI things as well. But Charlie's specific comment that he didn't believe in empathy is that while he certainly talks about wanting to help people and wanting to people get out of ideologies he doesn't agree with, the empathy part is you're trying to share in their pain or in their trauma, but you think that pain and trauma is based on lies, on faults. So he doesn't believe in empathy and sharing that concern, if I'm making any sense. But the toxic part is it changes you if you empathize with someone who is being who is under the guise of bad thinking. There's a book by one of the Turning Point allies, I forget her name, but it's called Toxic Empathy. It's high on Amazon's the bestseller list at the moment. But that's the idea, that empathy and sympathy and feeling for people who are under delusion perhaps offers the opportunity for you also to be under that delusion.
Sin is catching.
Yeah, right. Think we have time for one more? Anybody else? Bueller, anyone?
Well, one of the ways that we close out often is to think about what authors or thinkers you think your book is in conversation with, or you kind of hope that your book is in conversation with. So this is your time to be as arrogant as you want. Okay. Don't be humble. Who were the authors and thinkers that you were kind of had in your heart as you were writing this book?
I do want to say there have been many people that have written about Christian dominionism, which was what it was known in the 80s and the 90s, before it was known as Christian nationalism. And one particular person sticks out to me because her name is Sarah Diamond, and I mentioned her in the last, I think, the afterword. And she wrote 3 books about this movement in the late 80s, early 90s, and she was she coined the term dominionism as a scholar. And I bring her up for 2 reasons. One, we should all read her stuff. And 2, she got out of academia because she couldn't make a life out of it. And I wanted to mention that because there are many people who have stopped writing about this movement because they couldn't make a life out of it. There's a guy named Bruce Wilson who ran a website for 10 years, and he's on Twitter now, and he constantly posts things under my stuff like, yeah, I wrote about this too. Like, yeah, I know, and nobody knew who he was. I think there are many people out there like that. And I tried to quote them as many as the times I could.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Tina Pippin. Again, Tina's book is up front. You can buy it from Charis. And I want to thank everybody who's online watching. And we want to encourage our folks who are watching online to click the teal button to buy the 7 Mountains Mandate from Charis. We really appreciate you doing that. And for everybody who's physically here, you get first dibs. Do you have a question, Matt?
No, I'm sorry. I was just stretching.
You're just stretching. All right.
More of a comment than a question.
Yes. So go out and spread this information. Let folks know about this movement, because I think a lot of people don't actually know this information unless they kind of are adjacent to this culture. And so I think it's really important that people know kind of what's happening, in the same way that people don't really understand the way that dark money works in this country, or a lot of things. So go out, tell folks. If you can't buy the book tonight, request it from your public library.
Mm-hmm.
Librarians really do appreciate when we request books like this. So yes, thank you all so much. Please be safe and well. Donate to gun control organizations.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matthew.